Thank you all. Thank you, Jordan. I think a great place to start, and I think Tom teed it up really nicely, was really thinking about this idea of the title. Because I really do think that for a lot of our conversations, when we really started thinking about how we were going to work on this together, what was going to come out, Field of View really started that. So maybe let's start there and talk about how that developed.
I first and foremost, I cannot not thank every single one of you who have journeyed out here tonight to be a part of this conversation. For Lauren, for your brilliant your contributions. That's what I was trying to say. As the curator of the show, a real friend and somebody that I've wanted to work with for a really long time. Tom, somebody who has been a real champion for me in the practice over quite a few years now. We've built a beautiful relationship, and I think the dream of having a show here is one that has been long-standing. And so to have this exhibition here on view for all the reasons that Tom mentioned about thinking about the inside and outside and how I could really bring to light the things that I think about on a day-to-day basis, it felt like an opportunity for the two of us to consider how the practice considers the intimate and the exterior spaces were around. With that in mind, I think Field of View, it's interesting to hear you list off the titles. I was like, a lot of this is about seeing things, returning the gaze, Field of View, Within Reach. I think every title has always come back to this desire to highlight how the intimacy of the practice is so centered around the things that I can just touch, somebody within reach, whether it's returning the gaze, a sense of somebody returning the gaze to me as the person who is asking them to be vulnerable with me and share themselves through the act of being painted. Field of View felt like a perfect opportunity in this exhibition to think about how my practice has been so externalized in many ways throughout my career. I think it's always been about Jordan Casteel paints such and such. It's been very much about decentralizing me as the person who is making the work. And I think we really thought about how in this show we can re-centralize my point of view in particular, that the thing that ties all of this work together over a decade is that I am the central figure who has moved through the subway and saw this person, or got to spend an afternoon having a snowball flicked in my face in Central Park, or got to meet Damani and his beautiful daughter Shola in the dead of winter, where you had to push my car up because it was, it was like a big snowstorm when I came over. That I am very center in all of these experiences, which becomes really evident at the opening, or even like tonight where I'm hugging everybody, or the people are here, because it's very much the way that I look out into the world as a body of work and as a painter. That is the kind of center fact. So Field of View, I think, was a way of us thinking about my direct lens in this show as being the center or the guide.
Thank you for that. One of the ways in which, when we were really thinking about this exhibition and on the amazing timeline that we were able to really bring it together, and I think a lot of that had to do with because of all of the support, obviously, from the Hill Art Foundation team, from your amazing team at Casey Kaplan Gallery, but all of the collectors who live with your work were so kind to actually let it leave. And we were talking about there's some works here that you haven't seen since essentially you made them, because this is 10 years worth of work. Can you talk a little bit about that experience and what it feels like to, after you sort of have made a work and then you send it out, and then there's an expectation, right, that you will see it again, because we all hope that if you collect, you lend. So if you collect, please lend. PSA. But, what does that feel like to actually come in and sort of see the works?
Yeah. So what's really nice is now I am collecting my own work and then have lent almost 5 paintings for the show. So there are works that are in the show that I live with on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, actually there's straight up just hooks hanging and nothing's there. The problem with my collecting is I don't have anything to replace it with yet. One day, but not this time. So things are just gone. But I think what's really special about having the opportunity to see it all again is I often attribute the experience as I have not had the privilege of experiencing motherhood very explicitly yet, but I often think of this as probably being the closest to two things, my painting practice. One being to prayer or religion. I'm not a religious person at all, but I do think it's a very meditative space for me. I am the most at peace. I feel the most connected to something outside of myself when I am painting. And the other thing that is probably like having a child or gestational period where I am kind of imbuing into this painting everything that I got. I am trying to teach it the ways of the world in my painterly ways. I'm trying to make it large enough that it will hold space, quite literally. That's why the scale of these portraits became this scale at a certain time, but also the way that color functions, the way that the composition functions. I'm trying to kind of give it the telltale signs of something that is going to speak on its own in a similar way that you try to teach a child the way to be in the world. And then you also let them fly the nest at some point. So I think what's really beautiful is that all of these paintings have had a gestational period with me in my studio. And then I've raised them sometimes over the course of a few weeks, sometimes over the course of a few months, but then I let them go into the world. And part of that is about knowing that they will come back to me. And oftentimes I don't know what that looks like or what the venue will be or how they will feel, but there's a new conversation to be had as it gets situated next to works from a different decade or a different period of time, that I get to find similarities or differences and remind myself of my hand. It's like, I can see the way that I've grown and developed and my confidence has developed, but I've also see the consistency throughout, which has been really great.
You know, one of the things that we were thinking about as we were making the selections and also when we were laying out the exhibition was that it wasn't meant to be chronological, right? We were very much really thinking about, or I was thinking about, and then you let me think about, works that felt like they were either in conversation, but also works where you could sort of see the different aspects of Jordan's practice all together. I mean, really the earliest work is the one that's almost, if you move through the space, you could consider the last work, though I think there are different ways to move through this space. Can you really, though, you know, you're mentioning scale of the works and color choices, what are you looking for when you are thinking about, you know, I know for the people, it's a lot about the connection and the relationship, but also scenes. So thinking about something like Harlem Public, what drew you into that scene and drew you into that idea that, okay, I want to document this, I want to paint this, I want to make this last forever?
I think one of the teens might have asked me that question last week, and I struggled with it as much then as I'm probably going to struggle now because it is so instinctual. There is something about really trusting that the things I see are worth kind of being investigated further. I think it starts with this desire to understand something. It starts with a question. It starts with a curiosity. It's all about kind of being curious about the world around me and wanting to take the time that painting and being in the studio allows to like investigate it further. That oftentimes I am taking a photograph in certain spaces and I might not notice at that time, like I think even with you, Damani, like I didn't notice the maraca on the floor. Like there's very explicitly a toy that was on the floor in front of your feet that I didn't think about compositionally or like be like, this is an important part of the story until I was like in the moment of making that painting. And then suddenly I'm like, oh, wow, there's this thing that I get to discover and become curious about. And like, where did you get this maraca for your daughter? And like, what does this mean? Is it just to make sound for her? Or do you guys like have a little song dance and knowing about you and like your connection to music or whatever it might be, that then this bigger story gets told? I think it is a deeply observational practice in that way. And so choosing subjects and or places happen to be the people and the places that I'm quite literally meeting in the storybook of my life. You want to be a painting?
No comment. I think that's really just fascinating, this idea of the observational nature of your practice and what that means, and this idea that, yeah, you are also rediscovering things, right? You're taking these photos and you are actually spending time with them in the studio and various elements sort of come out, but then you're also changing colors and doing different things as well, which I think is also the beauty of your practice, where it's not as if you're saying, this is exactly what I saw in this exact moment, but you're really putting, again, you as the center of yourself in the works. Can you talk a little bit about that process a little bit? Like when you were there, like, I know it's instinctual, so I feel like it's the same, so I just answered it.
Oh, it's okay. I might have some other new antidote.
You sure?
Yeah.
Let's try it.
Well, I did have a thought while you were saying that, which is a new antidote, which is about kind of the gaze and the centering of myself. Is that what you were thinking about? Sure. Oh, okay. Because I do think that the direct gaze, what's interesting is that over, the last 10 years as the practice, like I said, that there have been these kind of contextualizations of my practice that has felt sort of externalized. I remember in my first show in New York, I was painting these nudes of Black men. And oftentimes people would enter that space. I was, Jordan Casteel, who very much at that time, and sometimes I still feel that way. But either way, people were like, where is he? And so there was an invisibility aspect for me, and even this hyper visibility I was trying to create. I was trying to make hyper visible the Black male, their humanity, their vulnerability. But in that act, I also felt like people were taking me out of it. So then in protest or whatever, I was always like, but I'm right here. And they're looking at me first. Actually this gaze, the returning of the gaze is so explicitly including me in the conversation. It has always been for me about my relationship to these Black men. I was reading an article recently, because I've been going deep in the archive where I'm talking about my work even in those earliest phases, where I kept saying it's about me as a daughter. It's about me as a sister. It's about me in relationship as a friend, as a lover, as somebody being in relation to. And I do think that there is a way that the self-portraiture aspect that you're talking about, that I've always been interested in kind of trying to centralize myself while also decentralize myself, because life is complicated and I'm a Black woman in America. And I think there's an invisibility part that I feel by being a woman in America, but also a hyper visibility at the same time. So the work sort of represents that dichotomy at various points.
I think it's the both and, right? It can be both. It can be something that you are presenting other people, other places, but you were still centered and you were still there. And I think that's so evident in the ways in which your various subjects are all connected, right? It feels like, if you're looking at more of a portrait or the landscapes or one of the garden works, you can definitely sort of see your hand, but also you present. And I think that was also really something that was exciting to think about in this exhibition, because, we got sort of the beautiful runway in a way that we could make this what we wanted it to be. It wasn't as if, Hill Art Foundation said, this has to be 10 years of paintings. It has to be this, it has to be that. So we were really able to, I think, in conversations and continuing conversation that we have had, I think, for a very long time since we met, when you were an artist in residence at the Studio Museum and I worked there. I wasn't just, I mean, kind of the same. So it was really exciting to have these conversations and then to really think about, okay, well, what are the artworks that are examples of that, but also I think allow for people to see maybe works they haven't seen in a while or see parts of your practice that they haven't seen. Was there, when we were talking and really thinking about the checklist and thinking about the works we wanted to have on view, was there any sort of reticence or concern about the ways in which we were going to put the works up together, right? And really having them have different ways, and knowing that they were made over different periods of time, different subjects. Were you any concerns?
I was pumped. Genuinely, from the very beginning, I felt like this was the exhibition. Your idea of I remember us talking about not wanting it to be chronological, and I felt like we were able to have the show that I've been imagining and experiencing in my own life, in my head, for a very long time, in terms of being able to say so explicitly, look at a decade's worth of work. It has never been just this or that, or Jordan is a painter of this or that. It's Jordan Casteel is a painter where her centralized kind of experience and observations were, again, I keep coming back to that, but I was so excited. I thought it was an opportunity, and we found this out while we were curating, literally putting works on the walls, right? We're in this room very explicitly, making all these connections across time and space that as we were hanging this room in particular, this was the first work that we hung. This was the first one hanging, right?
No, but we knew it had to go on this wall because it came after.
That was the first one.
Right. It was, there were.
Harlem Public.
Yeah. Or this, yeah. Yeah.
We We knew that these had to exist in this room. And then as Harlem Public was up and we were putting up the Carolinas, we were looking at the trees in the background, like the way that these lines and these marks are really exaggerated behind this family. And then across the way, literally in the reflection of the window is like a mimicking of the same tree. And then it's here with Damani, like that was in Harlem. This is in Central Park. That was upstate. Like all of these things that connect a way of being in the world that was exciting. I was just excited. I was excited. I'm excited.
It's exciting. I was also excited. I mean, I think to your point about discovering so much in each painting and the different conversations when you see them, right? Because you all know looking at images on a screen, even in a book, it's not the same as actually seeing them in person. So really being able to pull out a lot of those conversations. And I think even when we're upstairs and really this idea of the flow of the works, we also, I think, we're very considerate and considering of this location that Tom pointed out really beautifully, the High Line and then the streets of Chelsea. Maybe do you want to talk a little bit about that process for us and really thinking about wanting to make sure that the streets and the High Line and those things.
So what was also really great about this space in general is so upstate, the way my studio is set up is that there are these huge windows. I have these direct views of the outside that I've become very fond of throughout the day. And this felt like a space that mimicked that for me. And part of the decision of having the chairs and setting up that space is that I wanted it to feel like being in my studio. I wanted people to feel like they could stay a while. I wanted people to feel like they were making connections and slowing down enough that they might observe something outside the window that they might not have observed before. There might be people who have come to the Hill Art Foundation for many different shows and not made the connections between the way the blues on, I'm just like in my head, I'm sort of riffing, but the blues on this open 24-hour sign is similar to the blues on the pants of Elizabeth and Roman in his little pants, that you just start to kind of see and observe the outside in a different way, which I thought was great.
I got it. I know. It doesn't matter. I mean, I think that speaks to also what we were thinking a lot about, right? This idea that wanting to give people that space to spend time with the works, because to your point, there's so much to see, so many conversations to pull out, not just with the paintings each other, but also the outside, the inside. And it was really lovely to be able to have that. And as we were thinking about the different ways in which, okay, what painting is going to go here, what painting is going to go there, and really having some fun. I thought that was really fun to really think about and be like, oh, right, these street scenes and what it means to have a painting of a storefront facing storefronts and just being able to really have fun in a way that I don't think we always get to talk about in this work.
I agree. I completely agree. Do you have a favorite? Did you have anticipation or a favorite moment? I want to ask these questions back.
Like,
tell me.
A favorite. I hate picking favorites.
But okay, if you think about this exhibition as a whole, where is there a moment in which you find yourself kind of reflecting on the work in a different way, that because of the way that it's curated or the way that it's situated in the space, that you're observing something different?
I think for me, it really just always goes back to the paintings a bit. It's like, yes, I think what I loved about this space was the openness. Also, I love being able to have this moment where we are here on this level, but we can look up and see the paintings there, or when you're up there, you can see down here. So there's not the same walls that I think often exist in many spaces where I'm curating. If you're thinking about, the box of a museum, and of course some museums have different sight lines, but I think that was really fun to engage with and think about, okay, well, if we're coming around this way, what is that first work that you're going to see? How are we going to pull people in? I mean, luckily everything pulls people in. And I think also even with having some of the alcovey spaces where you actually have to move into to see the work, that was exciting to think about how that was going to work. But no, I think for me, it's the paintings. And I think what I felt most excited to see, because you know this, and probably I'm obsessed with self-portraits. So the ones that are more traditional in that form of self-portraiture, even though your tradition of self-portraiture is still only like a glimpse of you, which I really appreciate. And so it was really exciting to think about having those works in the show. Great. Can you talk about your garden and really starting from the beginning? Because I think it's important to talk about how your plants, the seedlings, how they all sort of start inside that part and how that plays itself out into coming and turning into an actual painting.
I was thinking while Tom was talking so eloquently of me planting my seeds that then they literally show up in the paintings. I think it's so similar in the way that community is built for me. It's like planting these seeds of relationships with people that then build into these communities that become the paintings. And I think that the garden has become a real safe space for me. And I've always loved, whether it was in Harlem, I was baking all the time. Now I'm not baking as much because I'm mostly outside, but winter is upon us and my garden is shut down and I'm going to need something. So baking's coming back. But I think it's always been really healthy as a way to express myself and my creativity. I'm the kind of person who needs to keep my hand, even as I'm talking, I'm like flailing my fingers around because keeping my hands in motion is something that is very soothing to me. And the garden became an opportunity to play with color and texture and really experiment, get my hands in dirt and messy and feel free in a really explicit way with my own design. The giver in me, I'm an extreme nurturer. And so the ability to grow something and hand someone the product of the fruit that I have born, like now I am like, if I could have made pickled beets for all of you tonight, I would have. But my beets aren't looking very good right now, but that's neither here nor there. But genuinely, like there's something really beautiful to me. And I'm also obsessive enough that as a personality, that of course I wasn't going to just go to the store and buy a seedling. Like some part of me was like, financially, that doesn't make sense. Now I've learned that actually there's a lot of money that goes into, there's probably more doing it the way that I'm doing it. But at the time, it was like, I'm going to go and make this the hardest thing possible for myself. It's literally the same with painting. Okay, I'm all over the place, but I'm having, this is what my therapy is like. I'm like, burp, burp, burp. But I very explicitly find myself like in the studio. I'm looking at Way 2. I remember being in grad school, and I don't know if it was you, but I have this memory of like Heidi Hahn being like, why do you always do this the hardest way possible? Like I always make my paintings, like literally I have to do this maybe isn't the right example of a painting. The right example is like that shirt over there where I mixed all the colors for the pink. I just painted the pink. Then I mixed all the colors for the green, and then I just painted the green all over the shirt, right? And then as the finale, I take the white paint and go around all of it very painstakingly, like go with the smallest brush, go around everything that I've done, rather than creating a layer of white and letting that dry and then like building layers. Like I'm gonna sit there and literally decide to like outline every possible thing. And I even snow, I don't know, I can see it and I can see that obsessive quality, and the garden has become the same thing. It's like, now I need a greenhouse because my husband has told me the dirt tracks throughout in the wintertime but I have basically turned, like in the winter, half of my studio becomes a greenhouse. I've been collecting seeds. I'm literally keeping the seeds. I'm growing the seedlings. I'm then making drawings of what needs to be, companion planting is a great thing. Lots of bugs out there. And all of that becomes like a free space for me to play. And I love that then I can sit in that garden and make paintings in that garden, or I can make bouquets and bring them, again, another form of kind of sharing something beautiful with others. At the opening, I picked all the flowers at the opening from my own garden in buckets. And Veronica and I sat here and made bouquets to go throughout the entire exhibition, because it felt, when we were looking at buying, literally Sarah's like, okay, these are the kinds of bouquets we're looking at. And I was like, nah, like I just like I cannot have all my dahlias upstate and like think that they're going to sit there and like buy a thing when I could bring the buckets and make it hard for myself, carry the buckets and then make the bouquets. But I think it is just another way of exercising, even in building communities and even in the way that these relationships are built in these paintings. I'm going to keep coming back. It is about work. For me, it's all about showing up and being consistent with showing up. The garden is another place, relationships is another place. And that authentic kind of care, I think, is what then becomes the beautiful part of the paintings. But it is true of me, is the bottom line.
It's true. The care in your practice, in the paintings, in the garden, in the cakes you would make for people, probably still do make for people. Good. It's a lot. It's you. I'm. It was delicious, actually. I still think about that cake a lot. But I think it comes across, and I think it also comes across in the way that, community plays a part not only in your practice, but your life and how people show up. Like all these people have shown up here. The opening was just such, I think, a really beautiful time as well, because I think even people that you have painted whose works weren't in the show came because they were here to celebrate you. And I think that just speaks a lot to how the longevity of the work, the longevity of your practice, and all of what that means. I don't think there was a question there I just wanted to say that because it felt important to really think about. Can you talk a little bit, and soon I think we will open it up for questions, but before that, can you talk a little bit about scale in this? Because I think one of the things, here we have some of the larger works in this room as well as in smaller, but then you see, if you go around this wall, you see some of the smaller flower portraits. So can you talk a little bit about how scale plays itself out in your work?
I think it served different purposes at different times. When I first started making portraits and doing those nudes in particular, scale served a very intentional purpose. I was painting the Black male figure in a very vulnerable state. I wanted to find all the ways of protecting them. Again, like thinking about my gestational period of imbuing into these paintings all of the skills they would need in the world, as I was like, I'm going to make you strong before anybody can take this away from you. And one of those decisions was I wanted them to feel like they were literally pushing against the bounds of whatever canvas I made. So a lot of those canvases, there wasn't as much environment present in them, but their feet would be kind of pushed up against one side or the other, or feel like they were kind of boxed in, and referencing maybe how one could feel in a society such as this. And then another decision was like, if they're going to leave my studio, then I want people to make room for them. Quite literally, somebody has to physically make room for their bodies in space. And so to do that, I need them to feel lifelike. I need them to feel big. I wanted them to be able to step out of the canvas and be in a room and in conversation with people as directly as possible, like even if I wasn't there. So those were the earliest kind of decisions around the canvases getting bigger. Then that has now evolved as I became more interested in all the things around a figure that help to contribute to who we know and tell a story of who this person is, that suddenly a maraca can show up and feel like it's a part of it, or the inside-outside play. I became very curious in the way that environments shape who we are as well, and wanting to paint more environment. This painting's kind of a perfect case in point. It's a portrait, it's a during Casteel portrait, but it also is a during Casteel landscape. And I've just I think I've been playing a game on everybody for many years where I've been slowly introducing them to me as a landscape painter over time, is that, I just wanted to keep dipping my foot into this kind of conversation, but also to have just the canvases exude more of an environment. And then the shift to the smaller scale has been really fun. And then I started doing crop paintings because I started thinking about Elizabeth in Rome, and I started thinking about really special moments in paintings. I love this glove so much, this pink in the glove, and then this way that these forms are so topographical that I thought that maybe somebody would see that as a painterly decision more readily if I took out the faces or the full form of a figure. So I started kind of making these crop paintings to try to really investigate painterly decisions on a more intimate scale. And then I got my garden upstate, and I wanted to figure out how to paint my garden, and I wasn't going to lug all my stuff out there. I might one day, but the aisles are pretty small in my little garden thing. And at the time, I had experienced my own kind of health stuff, and I needed to go back to that, my own intimacy. I needed to be reminded of my own intimacy and preciousness, and I wanted to be able to just have a canvas not stand on a scaffolding and not feel this kind of grandiose, labor-intensive project. I wanted to kind of feel the intimacy of having something in my hand, and being in a place that was bringing me great joy and peace. And those paintings, the smaller ones, are literally outside of the frame, my thumbprint is all over them, and probably some bugs or something. So, yeah.
Do you have a sort of preference or a favorite scale that you like to work in?
I've now come to love the variety. I love that I can be in the garden and make a really small painting. I love that I can take a photograph and bring it into the studio and make a large painting of the garden. I love that there's a a freedom in being able to kind of choose what scale is going to best fit what subject or person or thing that I'm thinking about. There's something that, they're just such different feelings. Like getting up and down on the scaffolding, I experience the paintings in the same way that I kind of imagine other people experiencing them. When I get up close, it all falls apart. Like when I'm just here and painting this, I'm just thinking about the way the planes of the blue and the green are matching to create a certain fold. And then when you step back, it's clearly a glove. And so I'm having that same experience when I'm painting these big ones. And I do enjoy that. I like the kind of dissection of the canvas as a whole.
How many works, so in the studio, how many works are you working on at a time?
I used to be a monogamous painter, in that I would, especially in the portraits, I'd be like, I am with this person energetically until it is done. I am in it, I'm in it, I'm in it. And then when that's done, I move on to the next one. And in the past year or two, I've really started doing underpaintings, at least on multiple paintings at once. I have found that I just kind of enjoy the freedom of moving from one canvas to the other. A part of the practice that I think isn't always fully, it's not talked about very often, but in the way that the paintings are made is that I work within sections. I work wet and wet, and I complete sections all in one sitting. So the entire face would be finished in 2 hours, and then I am done. And then that literally is never getting touched again. I'm not going back in. I'm not editing it. I'm not fixing it. I'm literally, you are now done, goodbye. And that means that I can be goodbye and go somewhere else. But that's why, that sounds bad. I don't like that. That's the monogamous part of me. It's I really care about them. I'm not going very far. Or I'll complete the jacket in one sitting. And it frees me in some ways when colors are mixed, because I like them wet and wet. I will complete an entire kind of color story all in one sitting, because I'm mixing all the colors in advance and then, using them all in one sitting. So I think that's a part of what allows me to feel a certain amount of freedom, and the scale becomes.
Do you always, in the painting, so after you've done the underpainting and then you're sort of going and finishing a section, are you moving through the paintings in the same way? Or does it matter for you, I have to start with this section always, top left corner or not? Or does it really just depend on what the work is?
I almost always start with the face with figurative work. I like the face and the hands or whatever kind of visible skin there is. I feel like that becomes the anchor again. That's then that tells me what the rest of the painting needs to be. I get to connect to somebody and really feel that reconnection in that moment. And then in the maybe Harlem Public, I have no idea where I started on that. I would imagine that I would have started somewhere fairly large. I tend to kind of feeling maybe is something, it's like writing an essay. You want to just get a paragraph down so you can figure the rest. Yeah. So I think there's some part of me that wants to kind of get something done that is maybe an easy way in to warm me up. Sort of. And faces and hands, that's so instinctual for me now. It's similar kind of warming up.
Cool. One last question from me. You've talked about, and Tom mentioned, all of the school groups that have been through, and then last week you talking to the teens. Did you, in those conversations, really come across anything that they asked you or made you think about the work in a different way?
I love kids so much. And what I think is really interesting about teens in particular is that, I guess there's been a variety. Literally, I had elementary school kids. First thing I did is kind of bend over and I'm what did you guys see and feel when you entered the space? I feel like I asked almost every group is what's your experience when you first entered? And what's been really exciting is all of them have been homey. I feel homey. I see color. I feel I see myself. I feel comfortable or safe. Literally the words were reflective of something that I am deeply trying to on a guttural level have these paintings achieve. And they have been mirrors for me. I think the thing that I felt the most surprised by the teens was I felt so affirmed. I think they are incredibly affirming because they're incredibly honest. There's no sense of expectation for how they're supposed to be in a certain space or time. And they're so smart. They were able, especially the teen group, I felt the questions they were asking were observational of me as a person in relation to these paintings. They were observational of the scale. They were observational over periods of time, or noticing pieces of paintings of being like, who is this person? Or why did you do that? That I just want people to be curious like me. And I think by slowing down enough to ask those questions, like I genuinely felt affirmed. I think kids are the future, but genuinely, like I genuinely felt that way. I was like, they're brilliant. We're going to be safe here. Actually we'll be fine. Because they're able to see without the pomp and circumstance and be playful and honest about what it is that they see when they enter a gallery with these works on the wall. And to have such a diverse body of kids come in and say that they felt at home and seen is, I don't know, that's all I needed.
Well, your work allows that, right? And you also taking the time to engage and ask them what they've seen and what they've experienced, I think opens that up. So I think it's really, what an amazing opportunity. And I think it's really the idea of the future and what that means, right? And what that experience will do. Because I think we all have a story. Hopefully we all have a story of someone who's made a positive impact, even if it was like a very short interaction, and what that means. So I think, you're setting those kids up very nicely with this exhibition and you taking the time. So thank you. Now we're going to open it up for questions.
Oh, Benji. I'm ready for you.
Thank you, first of all, and hi. This is amazing. I had a question about your intentions when creating all this incredible art. I was looking around this room particularly, and it seems like a lot of it is capturing winter. And I don't know if you painted them in the winter or just captured them in the winter, but I was projecting during dark times that, this art was cathartic for you or an expression or something. So I'm wondering about that. And is it just for you as you're creating, or are you thinking about an audience, and who is that audience?
I would say a few things. I have seasonal depression too. So yes, but literally, I think the winter is hard, and it is also one of my most productive periods. It's a time where things become quiet. There's a certain stillness outside that we all get to experience. People are quite literally inside themselves, and there's not as much kind of face-to-face interaction or the ability to move through and kind of encounter somebody else. So I do think that there is a way that sometimes I'm photographing someone in the winter, and then those photographs sometimes stay with me for a period of time, but I have a vision in mind of who like the story I'm trying to tell. So sometimes I have an idea of whether it's a specific exhibition that I'm building towards and wanting to tell the story of something, a question, or that curiosity becomes like the theme, so to speak, of the body of work that's being created. I would also say that for me, the audience is quite literally first myself, like genuinely, like because that's the meditation, the prayer part of it, is that it is so deeply internal that I do genuinely think about no one else when I'm making the paintings. Like there's a vision that as I'm looking at Harlem Public and like Breonna Taylor, that I would be making these paintings and like thinking about all the things that are happening in the world that I'm deeply passionate about and care a lot about. But the reality is that I'm thinking about it before and after, but I'm not necessarily thinking about it when I'm making. In that present moment, it becomes my catharsis. And then after that, I think it becomes about all of you. It becomes about kids. I think it becomes about the person who's never encountered a museum or a gallery before coming in and seeing something for the first time and feeling welcome there. I remember being at the Studio Museum, quite literally, my goal at the time there was to get people who I was quite literally meeting on the street on 125th Street inside the museum. The thing I was saying to people was like, hi, my name is Jordan. Have you ever heard of the Studio Museum? And a lot of them would be like, no. And I'd be like, do you know that David Hammond's flag? Yes, like iconic. And I'd be like, cool, that's a museum. And my goal is to get you on the walls of that museum, like I want to bring you inside. And in a more theoretical, emotional way, I think it's about my audience is about bringing people inside who might usually function on the periphery, or in different spaces have functioned on the periphery. Yeah. Thank you, Benji. Good to see you.
You already spoke to this a little bit, but I've been very interested in the way you use color. I teach middle schoolers, and I use your paintings for our portrait unit. And part of the reason that I have gravitated towards your work over other artists is the way that you show color in skin, and the light is just so beautifully reflected in the features. And so if you could talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm obsessed with color, as in my bright green jumper. Just generally, like as a child, I had a red room. My friend Katie from middle school, we definitely hung out in my red room. I'm sure of it. I definitely, whatever. I don't know, whatever. I just love color, like a yellow room, whatever. So I think I've always felt a certain freedom in color generally, and seeing color as a way of expressing emotion or space and time. And I think that the skin goes again way back to me making those nudes of Black men. That first color experiment, and the way that I wanted to experiment quite literally with skin was another tool in my toolbox as I was preparing these Black men these paintings to go into the world, where I was getting ready to let them fly away from the nest. Was I wanted to think about the ways that people would be forced to ask questions in front of their bodies. So some of the questions would be walking in and being like, oh, this is a portrait of a Black man. But then they would be like, oh, actually he's green, or he's pink, or he's purple. What are the kind of assumptions that I'm making before I actually take the time to investigate what is actually in front of me? What are the assumptions that I'm holding? And that desire, I think, has continued throughout my practice as a whole in representing people of color, and wanting to allow the real breadth of what color is, and the real breadth of what I've experienced as a Black person in my family, of what color is, and of people of color, and how diverse and multifaceted and colorful and beautiful I think that we are, have that literally be present on the skin. And I think the canvas, things now, they're more nuanced, the way that color is being used. There's some Damani where you quite literally have it in a green, an emerald green. I wanted in this one for him to feel like he was almost a trunk of a tree, in the same way that the trees are reflect outside, a really anchoring, grounded force in the middle of the plane, and feel connected to nature just as much as his body does. So I just feel free to play. And there's a painting that I just made that's going to Miami, where I had a dahlia that was quite literally sitting on my, I'm like, what is the thing I paint on? Palette. And I was trying to decide color. I have color aids. I have this drawer just with colors, paint chips. And I literally just go through this drawer with paint chips, in essence. I'm looking at them until I hit a color that I'm like, okay, that's gonna be my light. And then I pick a color and I'm like, that's gonna be my dark. And then I pick a color and I'm like, this is my gradient, right, of the skin. And then suddenly I have a whole kind of array that can be what somebody's skin is. And that painting, it was the dahlia. What then came to be as a person I've painted, her favorite colors are purple and yellow. And I didn't know that till she came to the studio and was like, no, what's crazy is that's my favorite color, But I just allow myself the freedom. Everything is available to me. I'm a magician because I'm a painter, is what I always told my students. It's the beauty of being a painter versus a photographer is I get to be a magician and do what I want, And so I feel like it's just an opportunity for play and for other people to ask questions in relationship to it.
So I thought those were two really phenomenal questions, and hope everyone tempers their expectations with what's going to come out of my mouth.
It's going to be great.
But I wanted to ask that in 5 or 10 years, when Tom hosts, another Jordan Casteel, show, what?
Making seeds, dropping them.
Oh yeah, I'm planting. What are we talking about, or what are we thinking about, or what are some themes that you either hope are there, or that may evolve, or are sort of germinating in your head?
What's interesting about the practice is that it has taken me on a journey with it, because it's quite literally reflected of this journey that I never really expected. When I was making those nudes at Yale, I was representing my classmates. I was representing people from the School of Drama, then moved to New York City. And by being in Harlem, I was like, oh, like I'm meeting literally people on the street. And I was searching for home quite literally. I was feeling like I had left Denver, Colorado and wasn't sure what was up or down. And then I just felt the draw to say hello. It was like, I have this feeling that I want to do portraits of people here because maybe instinctually, I was seeing paintings all over the place. I was seeing people, I was seeing opportunities to meet people and for them to get to know me. And I never, 10 years ago, when I did what's crazy is the earliest work up there where it's a self-portrait, oddly enough. And it's a self-portrait where I've cut myself quite literally out of the frame. It's interesting because I don't think I was ready yet to put myself so center in the practice. And now I'm sitting here being like, look at me, I'm in the center. Like, I want you to see me. Is that what has happened in a decade's worth of time is that I've gone from literally trying to like hide to wanting to be recognized as the person, as the maker, as a human being myself for the first time. Like, I never wanted to center my own humanity, and don't know why that's gonna make me cry. But I think what's really beautiful is 10 years later, like now I'm recognizing the need for that I deserve that I also think that the relationships deserve that in turn. 10 years from now, I have no idea what journey I'll be on. Will I still be living in the Catskills and frolicking around with my garden? Or will I be living someplace in Europe? Or will I be with my mom again in a rocking chair somewhere? All of those things are possible in a moment like this, like especially in a moment like this where there's so much uncertainty, it feels. It's all possible. And what's beautiful about the practice for me is that it gets to go on the journey with me, and it reflects back the way that my humanity ultimately and my journey is at the center of it all. So my hope is in 10 years' time, like you're just here with me and the work is here with me and we're all still figuring it out, you know? Sorry, no, don't clap. Oh, God. No.
Other questions?
I know that you sometimes deepen relationships with people through the process of painting them. Sometimes they're already close to you, and so you paint them. Are you drawn to doing portraits of people because of a look, because of a story, a plight they have, because of who they are to you? Do you find one more than the other, or?
It's always been so organic. Like, I can think of the very explicit moment that I saw someone like James, I talk about all the time, where like literally this man, the sun was setting so perfectly. Like, it was just like a Renoir, like you're like, this is a painting. There are some moments where you're like, is anybody else seeing this man like glowing on the street? Because somebody should, you know? So there are times like that where I see somebody or see something where it just, like I see it so clearly in my head as a painting before I've even painted it or met somebody. Then there are people where I'm like, you know, I'm thinking about painting my mom again right now, where I did a painting of her years ago, and just my own centering of like motherhood and thinking about that is wanting me to recenter my own mother and my relationship to it, and I'm gonna return to her as a subject. I think there are some people like Damani where I'm like, hey, I'm like Black and just moved to the Hudson Valley. Where are people at? And Damani's like, hey, you know, like I'm here, like what's up? Like come to my house, meet my family, meet my kids. And I'm like, okay, bet, you know, like we could have never that day. We hadn't met, I rolled up to your house in the dead of winter. Like I watch a lot of murder. Like you didn't, like it literally is like kind of insane. There are these other moments where people just have genuinely welcomed me in, or the painting of the Chambers family upstairs. Kim, I was in Saugerties. She has, I'm a Chambers vintage, and I'll throw that out there. I always give her a little shout out, but she has her vintage shop. And I was just shopping because somebody, again, I'm Black in the Hudson Valley, where's everybody? And somebody was like, there's a Black woman who's like, has this vintage like store doing a pop-up, you should go. And I rolled in there and I started making small talk with her, and she was like, I know your paintings, you know? And I was like, wait, what? You know, like what? And she was like, I have a beautiful Black family if you ever want to paint us. And I was like, yes, actually, like literally yes. And she was like, literally yes. And I was like, yeah, why not? Like it was another kind of totally organic moment where like next thing you know, but she was like, but we gotta wait till summer. And I didn't know why she wanted to wait till summer, but she was like, we gotta wait till summer. So we waited a whole 2 seasons before I showed up at her house. At that point, we'd hung out and had coffee or whatever. Even with you, you're somebody who I've also like, shout out to Veronica, who I've met since being in the Hudson Valley and been like, where are all the people at? You know, who similarly, just like Damani, was like, hey, I'm here. And we sat and had pizza together where we both found ourselves crying and sharing the depths of our stories. And I remember saying to you, I was sharing things with you that I hadn't shared with probably most of the people in this room who've maybe even known me longer. And how that happens is so organic, and how it then turns into a painting is so organic. Anytime my mother's like, I have somebody I think you should paint, or anybody, like if any of y'all ever want to text me and be like, I know somebody you should paint, I'm probably never going to paint them. Like genuinely in my head, the stubborn part of me is like, okay, bet, like, you know, like I didn't find them, like it's not me. But I do think there is something that is that is where you as a viewer also get to engage with the most like authentic part of the practice, is that it is so deeply rooted in just like, here we are, and now you're here, and you're seeing my painting, you know, like these beautiful moments. So who knows, you know? Okay, last one is Jen. I gotta let her have it.
It's Jen, don't be mad.
Don't be mad, I'm not mad.
I guess to preface this, like some painters I would find remove, you know, branding or certain things from items or spaces to make I guess you say, like put the pieces in like another time. And what I really love about a lot of your works is like the recognizability of like the Canada Goose or like the Crocs upstairs, with people really love to be like gardening shoes. And I'm like, they're Crocs. It's 2022 and it's Crocs. You know, like we're at a moment in time. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your use of like text and branding and stuff like that in your paintings.
What's interesting about that is, again, I'm gonna keep going back to the origin story of the nudes, right? My first ever studio visit, I was like, I'm a paint black men. Like I had that vision, but I painted my friend Corey, who was wearing a Nike You Mad shirt. And I had the studio visit where somebody came in and was like, oh my God, this says You Mad. Like, this, like you're trying to tell me something. It's like too much, you know? And I was like, what? Like, get over it. Like, what? Like, this is a black man. I'm trying to just sit. So the stubborn part of me was like, okay, bet I'm gonna get rid of his clothes then. You know, like if this is gonna be a problem, then like clothes are out, you know? I'm gonna like try to get you to the real core of the problem or the conversation I'm trying to have. Now it's interesting because I think that you're right, that the markers, there's the stubbornness that is now recognized how like maybe traumatic that feedback was. And there's some part of me that's like, that's actually a lie. Like there's so much that comes out in the things that we wear that I find interesting. I also, again, like the difficulty of like writing all the text. And then like this hunter, I wrote the HUNT in black and then went around it with my white, you know, like literally it becomes an opportunity for me to like do that difficult thing. And there's one, I think it's in the twins painting. There's this painting of the twins where I think they were wearing Jordans, but I wrote like, I don't know, I made some other brand up, and like years later, another kid was wearing it and I actually saw that it said Jordans and I was like, ooh, I really messed that one up. I think they say like, what it says, you look at them all the time. Yeah, it says it's like blah, blah, you know, like I'm like, clearly I had no idea what that was at the time, but similar to you, like I think there is something fun and interesting about like all these brands and the way that the brands like Marmont, probably gloves. Is that what that's called? Marmont. Sorry, I don't know. Marmont, that's something else. Hunter, like you said, it's something that kind of marks someone's time and place. And I think that is very interesting.
Were you not writing Jordan because it said Jordan?
No, I literally couldn't see it, I think. Or I didn't know the brand. I'm also like the least fashionable person. I was very stressed coming today because I didn't have access to my city closet. You know, like I came straight from upstate and I was like, I'm in the city and I'm like gonna be wearing my blunnies, you know? But this is like probably the most authentic way. I ultimately decided, I was like, this is who I am. And there are people that I love that will be there and they will accept me as I am today. And brands are like actually things I care very little about, but find interesting in other people.
Jordan, can we close it out, not with a question, but last week, one of our teen curators asked you about hands. And your explanation here in this painting, you've got a bare hand and then gloves. And and your use of hands, not just as you talk, as you just mentioned, but also in the paintings. And in the history of art, hands are the most difficult, harder than faces. I mean, Francis Bacon couldn't get it right, Velázquez could, but, so can you give us the answer to the student that asked you about hands? Because you were terrified of hands. Yeah.
Wade's over here nodding because he would have been one of the people being like, you can't draw hands. In grad school, it was definitely like very much a vibe. Like I went in, my experience in grad school was very much like showing up as like the kid. I felt like I was the kid off the street, like the stray dog that they like somehow let in the back door, like she looks a little lost, we'll give her a chance. And I just hadn't had a lot of exposure or practice or experience where most of my peers had years of practice of really honing their crafts, of learning how to draw in this like right way, And I was like, not at all, which is probably where I first fell in love with Alice Neal. I was like, if she's doing it, then so can I. And now, all these years later, the thing I get the most compliments on are the hands. But I think it is the stubborn part of me where I'm like, if somebody, I did say this today to a friend. I literally did what I called in grad school a light skin painting, the white painting, because if you give me a critique, like I'm the kind of person like, tell me I can't, I dare you, because then I'm going to like work that much harder. I'm going to either do that thing full throttle and I'm going to do it really well, or I'm just going to like take it as this challenge. Like, got it. Like literally the feedback was like, you can't draw. I was like, bet I'm going to just like draw all the time. And I'm going to leave drawing in my paintings. The feedback's like, your hands are looking a little wonky. I was like, great, I'm gonna make you fall in love with the way that I paint hands. Somebody's like, you're using too much white paint. And I'm like, here's a light skin painting. Like I'm literally just gonna use white paint for the whole thing. And it's one of my favorite paintings, like literally that then became the framework in which I got exalted into an exploration. And I think now the hands and the feet are some of my favorite things to paint, which is, all the more perfect because said I couldn't, and now I can. And I'm quite proud of them, so yeah.
Well, on that note.
Thank you, Jordan.
Thank you, Lord.